Hello and welcome. I'm Sylvia Schmidt. I'm a vocal improviser from London, and I'm here to talk to Jaka Škapin today, who is one of my close friends and collaborators. And we have recently come together to make a lovely album called Remembering.
Hello.
Hi, Jaka. Now today, I'm really glad to have you here with me because we're going to talk a little bit about the making process of this album, which of course I was a part of as singer, but you have very much had your fingers in all the pies and points of the mixing and production of the album. So I've got a few questions I'd like to ask you for our listeners today. Cool, let's do it.
Let's go.
My first question for you is related to the recording day that we've had in July. I was wondering, having planned the whole day, did you have a specific expectation in mind, and were they met, or were there some surprises?
The expectations were definitely met. I didn't want to be too loud about it, but based on the people that were in the room, I expected that there's going to be something beautiful created, and I had in the back of my mind that it hopefully should be released, but that could have been, one piece, or it could have been more than that. And the recording was organized in a really casual, impromptu way. I just started seeing our physical paths colliding because a lot of the members, travel a lot and come from another country and then go back out. And I just saw that there was an opening for that to happen. And obviously it was 2020. We've been in lockdown for a couple of months. I felt like giving the six of us the space to explore what we are feeling and what we're going through might be a really valuable thing to do, even if it's just for us, to have some fun and to feel like we can connect as a vocalist to vocalist. But what ended up happening is that we sang for 3 hours. We went from form to form, sometimes doing trios, sometimes doing quartets, sometimes singing all together, sometimes an individual requesting something that they really wanted to do, like a solo. And there was just a piece after piece after piece that came out. And I think we all felt just really satisfied at the end of the session. I think that was the most important thing. We felt happy and excited and really invigorated. And that was all, separate from actually thinking about how it might be released.
And moving on from that, from the actual recording day, so if we're looking at the mixing that then started thereafter quite immediately, there are different ways how a vocal recording could be mixed in points of the kind of aspects of it that you highlight. Did you have an initial idea what you wanted to transport for the listeners and what you wanted to sort of shape out in the mixing and production?
I think the most important thing for me was to keep the pieces as they were. So we didn't chop anything off. We just kept them as a whole. We didn't, change parts or add things or take things away. They're just as they were performed. We were really lucky to work in a beautiful analog studio called Soup Studios. So they had amazing mics. The room was very warm. They had a natural reverb chamber. So everything already sounded really lush and rich. Yeah. So the question was, how do you actually position those voices? Because we were standing in a circle facing inwards. So we kind of had a surround sound experience in the studio. But then the decision was, how do you approach it when you're trying to make a release out of it or make a single out of it? Obviously, it's quite hard to recreate that. But I think I really tried and I had a look at the individual pieces and treated voices in a similar way that I would instruments. So I kind of try to position them in a sort of an imaginary band setup where based on what people are doing or how they came in, what role do they play in a piece, they were either more so panned or more so below the actual solo, supporting the solo. And that was mostly what was going through my mind. And I think it does add quite a lot because at least it positions us in different places. And I think the experience throughout the album really shifts from piece to piece. They're quite different. So I think it's probably not how we remember them, but to me, they still work, together as a whole and as a complete narrative.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear about that because, given that each of us has the potential to take on any of those roles that you would have in a band setting, may that be the rhythm part or the melody, the harmony in between, that that those roles shift from piece to piece. That kind of keeps it quite interesting. That's great.
Yeah, and we didn't know what was going to happen. So we didn't know we had one, obviously, setup that was in the studio, that was the desk mix. And then we had to recreate all the actual pieces to the best of their ability to really fully realize them, which is actually one of the funniest and funnest parts of the whole process. Because if you would be doing in a live setting, you wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity to play around with individual parts, and especially as there are not that many fully improvised vocal recordings around, it just felt like a great opportunity to think about the individual songs or pieces quite specifically and make sure that they work within itself.
Yeah, that's true. Lovely. Well, that leads me onto a question that Guillermo asked, actually. Guillermo is one of our singers, and he remembered that he had a conversation with you about how to transform the recording from, being this like lump of improvisation into shaping it into an album. What kind of decisions did you have to make in points of like track length and format?
It was quite difficult, and it took quite a while because there was a lot of amazing music, and with improvisation, it can really go in many different directions. On the day, we fell into something that was quite wordy and had a lot of the themes that might be running through our heads when we thought about the lockdown or 2020 or where our lives were. So there were definite pieces that had to be highlighted, and you could call those singles, right? And then in between, there was definitely space for maybe some couple of shorter things that would bind the story together. But I really didn't try to interfere too much and have a specific idea of either the order or a number of pieces. It just had to go through an organic process of listening, re-listening, seeing if we can, let's say, clean a piece up. Because we also had a videographer in the room filming everything on a handheld camera, and I still don't understand how he did it. But he did it so well. I mean, there were a couple of noises, obviously, that he made as he was literally trying to navigate, through the mic stands. But he did such a brilliant job. His name is Pavel, and obviously we had a couple of noises like that we wanted to take out to really have a pristine vocal sound. But beyond that, it was obviously also a conversation with the individual singers, making sure that everyone's comfortable with what is actually getting released. But it felt like an organic process to me. It did take a while, it took almost a year and a lot of thought and listening, re-listening, or even me sometimes judging too much, sometimes thinking, is it valuable to release this sort of improvised music? What are people gonna get from it? Is it good enough? All of those things obviously go through your mind. But if I reminded myself to go back to the feeling that I had at the end of the recording day and how fulfilled we all were, that's all that kind of mattered. And that just pushed the process forward.
Yeah, it's really nice to I suppose when you're editing, you're going on a bit of a journey. You're shaping what's there, but you're keeping that connection to the day, to the feeling, to the people was at the core. That's great to have that in mind. Yeah, great. I have a question that is related to, I suppose the future, even though we're in the release process and there's plenty of work.
We are in the future.
We're in the future. There's quite a few things that have to happen, towards the release right now. And we've got some exciting plans of performing stuff and streaming stuff. But thinking long term for this particular project, is there a next level that you're already thinking of? Are there other directions you want to take the ensemble in?
It's really interesting because it feels like Remember is always going to stay in its own place as a very unique project. I think, obviously we're still in 2021, we're still in the pandemic, but when a couple of years pass and hopefully things normalize and they feel quite different, I think it's going to be really interesting to look back and to listen to an album like Remembering that was made in the middle of the first lockdown in the UK. I think for me, the most important thing that I think about when I think about collaborative vocal improvisation is the fact that there are not many examples readily available either of music or of people talking about it, because I found that even when I started sharing pieces from the album, people just didn't believe they was improvised. And it was quite hard to find ways of actually saying how was it done, because it was so unimaginable. I mean, they're nice pieces, they sound nice. People mostly thought, okay, music, yes, could be improvised, but words, they were definitely not improvised. So it's really about how to explain and showcase that process and what happens when the leadership of the music creation is shared in that way, when it's completely open. Obviously, I have plans on other sides when it's not as shared, and they're mostly related to my compositional interest and so on. But this particular place, I think it has so much value and longevity, and this is really just the starting point of having a song-based album of collaborative vocal improvisations online and available, especially also in video form. I think that's so important, and I think and hope that people are gonna watch the videos and actually being able to see how the pieces were created in the moment. That's all there was. There was nothing before, no conversation, no planning. Someone started or multiple people started, and that's it.
Yeah.
Off we went.
Well, this is actually, I've been thinking about this a little bit. Why is it so fascinating to you to put these pieces in an improvised context? Because given that the outcome, the songs, they are songs, they're very song-like pieces, and there are lyrics and all this. And why is it important to still create them improvised and not pre-write them?
I think they wouldn't be the same, obviously, if they were pre-written. Especially as creatives, we tend to sometimes overwork something. And I think the way we created them could never be repeated if they would be pre-written. It just doesn't work that way. The space you're in and what you create when you improvise, specifically with others, at least to me, just lets you explore a whole other range of places and possibilities that you cannot consider when you're working either by yourself or in a non-improvised setting. And I also think it really relates to what we need as a society, and it points to ways of working together collaboratively where the leadership is shared, when everyone has agency, when everyone has the ability to say what they want to say and create. And I just think we need more of that throughout our societal and individual existence. It's just something that I think can benefit, obviously, people that are creative and that sing, but also people that don't sing, maybe people that are just instrumentalists, or even someone that is not a musician at all. I don't think it matters. I think that the feeling that translates when you are improvising something in the moment, especially when you go as deep as we managed in the recording and actually capturing it, I really think that's going to touch a lot of people.
Yeah, I agree. It really fosters a lot of listening and connection that sort of takes people as a community to the next level, isn't it?
And it's the process too. It's the focus on the process and connecting in the moment to the best of your ability, right? Being the best counterpart to the group, or being the most true expression of yourself if you're singing by yourself, rather than being focused on a product that has so many different steps and so many different influences, making sure that the product, which is, what you get at the end, is anything and everything that we have to think about. I think it's really that shift in attention is quite crucial.
Thanks. Jaka, that's really interesting, talking about the day itself. And also, I was wondering a little bit more, what was the dynamic in the room? How were decisions made going from one piece to the next? Like, how did you know what's going to happen?
I think that was all decided between us. We knew that we had 3 hours, which is not that much, especially if you want to warm up and get into the right mind space. I actually wore a watch, which I don't do in my normal life, which was quite hard to be aware of, how long the pieces might be. But it was not to constrict. It was just to put us in a mindset of song form and to make sure that we can go through a process in those, let's say, major 2 hours of recording, so that people can ask for things that they want, so that we can try how do we feel about 6 people singing today? How do we feel about this trio or this trio or this duo? But we also just started with a really, you could call it a prayer or intention, however you want to, but we went round one by one and did a series of solos. And the first thing that I ever sung is actually something that ended up on the album called The Cradle of Hope. And also one of Bryony's and Kate's first things that they sang on the day ended up on the album, which I think is quite beautiful. And from then onwards, we tried a couple of forms just to see what works for us for the day. And then after that, there were some pieces that literally just emerged from a previous piece. So there was literally silence and someone came in with an idea that was different, but that really flew from the previous musical number. And sometimes people just verbally requested that they want to start as a soloist and then other people join, or that they want to do a duo with someone specific, or that they want to do a trio or a quartet. And I think we just continued in that way of sharing and always having the space for anyone to request things that they might want to do. And it just grew and grew in those 3 hours. And as I said, we ended up with pieces on the album that were the first things someone sang, and also some of the very last things that we sang ended up on the album too. And also there's so much amazing music that was not released. So that was a really hard decision to make. But I think I did want to tell a specific story with the album and really make sure that as you listen through, the songs relate to each other and the themes relate to each other. And also that we make sure to feature all the singers in an appropriate way.
Yeah, true. Yeah, and in that way, I suppose the recording session was an extension of our rehearsals and the way we work together anyway, isn't it? There is that openness and coming together very organically in whichever feeling everyone is on the day.
Yeah. And also fear. I mean, for me, there was a lot of fear on that day. I was not at home at all in that environment. It was my first ever improvised session. I don't even know why I decided to organize at that point, because it was scary. And I can hear that in my voice. I can hear like some of the trembling that I don't think I would do today, but that just is what it is. And for me, capturing all of that as part of your process is so important. And I think we don't see enough of it from artists and people in general.
Yeah, it's nice to carry that vulnerability. Just hold it.
Hold it close.
Hold it close. Yeah, exactly. Nice. I've actually got a little bit more of a personal question for you, which was inspired by Kate, one of the singers in the ensemble. Kate knows you for a couple more years than I do know you, and she spoke about how you've met in different settings, like different vocal ensembles across the London community, and she sort of highlighted to me something that I hadn't really thought about that much, which is that you, in the way you work with people and the way you reach out to different people, to different improvisers, you're a bit of a catalyst for sort of cross-pocket collaboration, and you spark ideas and projects, and you bring people together in quite a unique way, which I thought was lovely to hear from her. And the question that comes to mind is, where does that originate in you as a person? Like, what makes you reach out and bring people together in this way?
I think it's my general approach to creativity and how I actually like to create. I do like to sometimes create by myself, but I just find that it's so more easeful and so much more enjoyable when I create with others. And improvisation is also a very special place in how I manage to show who I am and actually be vulnerable and be creative without things that really stall and, disable my creative expression. I think I've studied songwriting and composition, and I've done a lot of work in choral and classical environments, but I've found that at a certain point it was just not working for me. It was not enough. It was strenuous, and it was just hard to follow that pathway because to me it just brought up all the things that I don't want to be thinking about when I'm creating, like perfectionism and self-judgment. And this place of especially collaborative vocal improvisation has really enabled me to view my creativity from a much more positive perspective. So I just value it so much, and I feel like inviting more people into it or sharing it more widely is really the most, or one of the most valuable uses of my time.
Yeah, it's very, I suppose that's very unique and powerful in the vocal improv community, is that it's so open. Yeah, I agree with that.
And we're also just great improvisers. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit, for what we continuously create or what we plan to create. I think sometimes we feel quite shy about what we do, and sometimes we feel like maybe it's best if it just stays in a workshop setting, in a room where only 12 people can hear it. And obviously there's a very important reason why those spaces are needed. But in terms of thinking about it more widely, I think it has also a place in front of larger audiences, or on bigger concert hall stages, or all of those things that haven't been explored yet and hopefully will be, with help of projects such as Remembering, but also with help from all the other wonderful things that the people that are on the album are doing, and also people that couldn't be there in the room with us are doing.
Yeah, that's really lovely. Thank you, Jaka. There's a lot of potential to explore.
Of course, it's just the starting point.
Exactly.
And it was so lovely to be on the other end of this, because as you know, I've done the other interviews myself and I really enjoyed asking questions. But thank you so much for taking the time and proposing that we turn the tables too.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's really interesting, I think, for all of us asking each other questions, because when you work with other people together, there's the assumption that like the perspective of the other person, when actually it's really interesting to hear how you've thought about this project before and how those expectations have shaped in the editing room and all that. And so that's been really interesting to hear about. Thank you, Jaka. Thank you for everyone listening, and check out the other interviews as well. Bye.
Bye-bye.